Today, we're here, of course, for the annual Hugh Leach Memorial Lecture, and it's very fitting that we have a talk about Yemen because that was a country that Hugh was closely involved with. He published a book, many of you may recall, in 2011, Seen in the Yemen, an account of his travels there with Freya Stark. And in a less happy way, it is also this year 10 years since the start of the Yemen civil war. And the humanitarian situation there is dire. Aid workers are currently detained by the Houthis. There is talk of some sort of show trial. It's not for me to preempt what Noel is going to say, but the Houthis' attacks on Israeli targets certainly carry with them the risk of the conflict broadening across the whole Middle East. So it's in a way a dispiriting moment to be thinking about this, but also very timely. Noel has for a long time been widely recognized as a significant expert on Yemen, and he's a long-standing member of the Society as well. He also, I don't know if he's going to talk about this, but I happen to know that he did once play host to Hugh Leach overseas. And I mean, I'll leave it to his discretion whether he has anything to say about that or not. But for now, I'm going to just share the screen over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for coming. And I thank you to Ross for Asian Affairs for inviting me, especially to commemorate Hugh Leach, who I did know. In fact, I first came across him, I heard about him when he made a rather famous visit to Sa'ada in North Yemen, where he did a report on the Jewish community. Many people have forgotten to live there at the time, and it made quite an impact at the time. But later on, I met him a number of times, I hosted him in Cairo. I was based in Cairo, and he was in Khartoum. He was still remembered in Cairo for the only diplomat to turn up with horse and carriage each day, coming through the Cairo traffic. But normally, I host him when he had a problem with his circus, including on one occasion, a problem with the lion tamer who'd had an argument with the lions. But Hugh was a very, very agreeable house guest, put it that way. Always something different from him. But anyway, today I'm going to talk about the Houthis, the Red Sea, and the future of Yemen. I just wanted to start by this summary. It's a summary of things that Abdul Malik al-Badruddin al-Houthi, the Houthi leader, said a few days ago. Just reminding people on the how they see their approach to Palestine. The principled humanitarian, moral, religious, faith-based stance in support of the Palestinian people. They claim to have attacked 193 ships linked to Israel, America, and the British enemy over the course of a year. And on the Yemen front, they've launched 1,000 missiles, they say, towards drones and used boats in the seas to support Gaza. And amongst the key achievements they claim is the closure and bankruptcy of Israel's Eilat port, coupled with missile strikes to Palestine 2 hypersonic missiles, which targeted deep into Israeli territory. Let's start with the Houthis, who originated from the Sa'ada area in the extreme northwest of Yemen in the early 1990s. And in really rapid terms, they took over Sana'a within 20 years or so, which is a pretty remarkable achievement for a group which really started with very little in the early 1990s. I'm showing this map here to just show what they currently control. It's the area in green on that is what they count, which is essentially much of the old North Yemen, the old Yemen Arab Republic. Now, the rise of the Houthis began with the Shabab al-Mahmoudin, which the leading youth, really in the early 1990s, which was created by the Houthi family, as I'll say something about in a minute. But it set up camps and schools to spread the particular version of how they saw Yemen and Islam. But it also occurred at a time when the state of Yemen was in a flux. The Saleh regime was beginning to disintegrate. And part of his his policies were, he called it dancing the head of snakes, which was supporting one side against another, so that he was always in power. And when challenged by Marxism, he encouraged the spread of Salafism and ideas of the Muslim Brotherhood into Yemen, which caused considerable resentment amongst the Lady Shia, from which the Houthis belong, and who mainly form about 30–35% of the Yemeni population, but they're concentrated in that area in the northwest. The key part of this has been the Houthi family, who are descendants of the Prophet. They're from North Yemen, from outside Yemen, northern Arabs, who originally, when they came in about 1,000 years ago to Yemen, they provided judges in tribal disputes, mediating in tribal disputes, and formed the imamate, which lasted from roughly the 9th century, 10th century to 1962. The Ahl al-Bayt, we call the descendants of the Prophet, have a special place in Yemen, particularly North Yemen society, and therefore this gives them a prestige which they were able to build on. Badr al-Din al-Houthi, which was the key person in this, was from the Jaruni section of Shia Islam, which is which is closer to Twelver Islam, the type of you find in Iran, Iraq, etc., than many other of the Yemeni Shia. He was very much influenced by the Iranian Revolution, as many of the Houthis were. They visited Tehran, and they were affected by the Iranian view of the state under Khomeini. From the very beginning, they announced their presence through this shout at the end: "Death to America, death to Israel, down with the Jews, long live Islam," essentially. But this is what they shouted at whenever they appeared in public. And this it began to annoy and irritate President Saleh, and he decided to try and suppress it, which he did actually, in the sense that he launched attacks on their area in the north, killing Hussein, who had been the leading figure in it. Although Hussein's father, who was a long thread, took over, and then eventually, a few years later, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the current leader, took over. I was trying to follow the events in Yemen in 2008, 2009, 2010, and during the national and after 2011, the national dialogue. The settlement was made after 9/11, when Houthi after the Houthis after Saleh was removed from power, the Houthis were excluded from the settlement. It was essentially an elite settlement between figures and the regimes. The Houthis were excluded, and parts of the southern movement were excluded from this, which was an error because although they participated in national dialogue, which was supposed to remake Yemen, I was watching them. So I was writing a report every month on Yemen at the time, gradually moving out of Sada, their stronghold, into neighboring governments, bit at a time, slowly, but over a 2-year period, you can see them doing so. Then suddenly they accelerated towards Sana'a. And that was a factor that they understood the tribal politics of the northern Yemen and the splits that were emerging between Sala and some of the tribal leaders. And particularly the fact that the tribal leaders in Matsulis had been alienated from Sala by his policies. So it was a fairly rapid spread towards Sala, and it soon became visible that he had done a Faustian bargain, pragmatic bargain, if you like, with President Sala to enable Houthis to take over in Sala in 2014. So he's taking over, signing a deal called the partnership, the peace and partnership, the peace and national partnership agreement, which left President Hadi, who then took over from Saleh in charge, but the Houthis in effect with power. I think the Houthis then made the mistake of moving into Sunni-dominated provinces in the northern, so the southern part of Yemen and towards Aden. And it was that move towards Aden that provoked the Saudis to act. And the Houthis then took over in February 2015 and have been in charge of Yemen since then. So, I think that throughout that much of this period, from 2015 onwards, they have been fighting the coalition. We've been bombed by the Saudi coalition. When you're looking at the Houthis, one should remember they've been at war in one form or another throughout the Saleh period, when they were attacked by the Yemeni Air Force, and into the period of the war, and now, of course, by the British and the Americans. That's Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the current leader of the Houthis. I'm not going to go into the religious side too much because I don't always understand it. I usually defer to others. But I was interested in the political effects of this. It's best seen, I think, as one of these periodic movements in Islam where people they want to go back to the Quran and look again at the Quran, look again at the scholarships, and use this reinterpretation as a basis for remaking society. And essentially, that's what has happened. Influenced by Hezbollah and the Iranian Revolution, the reference point that they use is called a Malazim, it's a 2,000 over 2,000 word document of the writings of Hussein, the founder, in effect, who was killed earlier. And it's a transcript of his lectures and his interpretation of Islam, and it's used as a reference point for the Houthis. The ruler of Yemen, this part of one of their tenets should be a Sayyid from the Ahl Bayt, from this descendant of the Prophet. Not necessarily an Imam. They're not actually talk about restoring the eminate, but of having the ruler and of the Yemen should be from the Ahl Bayt. And they privilege in their organizations the other people from the Ahl Bayt. So it's the core leadership are the Houthis and the Sada families. They created a very tight control system, which I'll show in a minute. Initially, they used supervisors, mainly Hashemites or Sada from the Ahl al-Bayt, who were placed in ministries and local organizations to ensure Houthi control of policy. Popular committees, which were the shock groups, they were used in taking power, have become part of the regime. And they were really intent on remodeling Yemeni society. It's really a political and social project. And they're trying to change the education system and introduce other reforms. I'm just going to go on to the next slide here. This is one created by Mike Knight from the Washington Institute. And it's built, shows their organization around Jihad Council. Jihad Council is similar to similar organizations in Iraq and Hezbollah. But it is a place where the Iranians through the IRGC Quds Force and Hezbollah have representatives on this council. But the key part of it is really this bit at the top. The leader of the Quranic progression is Abdul Malik al-Houthi. And you see here, he controls all these councils here, doing judiciary, government, the Supreme Political Council, which is the Houthi regime, the messaging is. They have a very good system of trying to develop and spread their messages. They have the military intelligence, which also it forms part of the backdrop to their relations with the tribes. There's a tribal council at the top, and they have the intelligence and security services who have been reorganized. But it's a tight group of people running the state, and this is well organized. And I go back again to my previous one to show really that last point. The Houthi family is in control. Abdul Malik al-Houthi is the final decision maker. Political successors are from the Houthi family, and the Houthis are well organized to retain power. So whether we like them or not, they are there, and they're going to be very difficult to dislodge. I think that's the fundamental message. Yeah. But they have weaknesses. One is, in fact, they don't have an air force, which is part of the reasons why they're confined to North Yemen and not going into other parts of Yemen, flatter parts of Yemen where air power can make a difference. But the main reason, I think, is their economy. They simply don't have the resources in their area to fight a war, pay state officials, provide governance, and they need to get oil and gas resources, which Yemen has, but they, you can see them here, are all controlled by the internationally recognized government, not by the Houthis. So so they have to generate income on their own bat, and they've done it through basic taxation, the taxes on telecommunications budget, fuel smuggling, distribution, customs duties, certification, smuggling, and some more nefarious activities. There is, in fact, almost an economic, although the war is currently in abeyance, there is an economic warfare going on, even like struggle going on between the Houthis and the internationally recognized governments. The Houthis do not, the central bank has split in two, so there's one in Aden and one in Sana'a. And it's the one in Aden which is recognized internationally. And it is that gives the internationally recognized government a powerful instrument when they want to use it against the Houthis. The Houthis recently, sorry, one of the side effects of this is that the internationally recognized government is printing riyals all the time, and you get inflation and problems with the exchange rate. Whilst the Houthis basically have to live on what they can make. they don't recognise any of the new notes produced by the internationally recognised government. So they have this separate currency in effect. And they recently tried to replace the notes, which are clearly some yet are disintegrating, with some coins. But that led to the internationally recognised government to say, no, you can't do that, ban their banks, and try and cut them off from the SWIFT international payment system, which would have been a disaster for them if it's gone through. It was the one major weapon that it used against them. But they're able to get around that by, through negotiation. But in effect, the real reason in the end was that Saudi Arabia, which had been backing the internationally recognised government, was persuaded not to stop this happening because of not because so much of the impact of the Houthis, but the impact of the 20 million people that are under Houthi control might have affected this flow of aid to them. The Houthis really they don't appear to care too much about the populations. They're interested mainly in their own business. But they've had to react recently to this economic problem, and there is considerable dissatisfaction. And you don't often see it happen, but it happened last year on an anniversary of the foundation of the Yemeni Republic, when there was actually demonstrations against the Houthis. They made sure this year it didn't happen, because they had the repressive machinery to do it. And they just set up a new government, but it took them about a year to do it, for change in development, which is sort of recognition that they need to do more. The arrest, they've also, there's a sort of paranoia development. You've recently seen the rest of aid officials and NGOs, leading to some of them from international organizations, which is causing a lot of problems. And it's going to, that sort of move they take will actually could affect the delivery of aid and humanitarian assistance to the people. It's still ongoing. That hasn't been solved. But the Houthis brush off threats, sanctions, and terrorist designations of the US and allies, and even if these hurt the population under their control. Now, the Houthis in the axis of resistance, the Iranians. The early contacts between Houthis and Iran, I think, was there from the very beginning. And there was practical help from around 2009, accelerated after the Peace and National Partnership Agreement in 2014. There's United Nations have a panel of experts looking into this, linked to a Security Council resolution, which actually studies what Houthis are doing in terms of smuggling and armed equipment. And it's documented. It's all documented. This type of arms that they receive smuggled in through Iran, and as well as non-lethal support from Iran. The Quds Force, the IRGC, have provided training, advice, and support together with Hezbollah. There are people there, have been there at least. And this is visible in the weapons the Houthis use in the Red Sea and the provision of intelligence. These are mostly adaptations of Iranian equipment, although some Houthis actually also make. But they don't depend on Iran for financial support. They listen to Tehran, but make the decisions in their own interests. Now, the Houthis in the Red Sea, as you see from what I've said earlier, that attacking Israel and attacking shipping, especially American shipping, is very much part of the DNA of the Houthis. So they claim the US assessed that they've attacked 160 ships. They claim around 293. They've been attacking Israel. They continue to develop their military capabilities. They talk about the fifth phase of escalation against the Israeli enemy, and support for the Palestinians. And they really see themselves as confident, determined, patient. They have widened their targets, keeps shifting in the Red Sea towards really any ships connecting any Israeli port. They claim to be cooperating with Iraq groups, and even claim that they are able to attack ships in the Mediterranean, though there's no basis for that. There's counter operations provided by US-led British and European naval forces, which help protect those ships and stop the Houthi missiles from coming in. The strikes by the US and UK must have reduced capacity. It's difficult to know, given the number of them, but they certainly haven't deterred the Houthis. For the Houthis, this is a badge of honor, fighting, doing this, attacking Israel, attacking the Red Sea. It wins popularity in the Arab world, seeing as one Arab country that's actually fighting the Israelis and doing some damage to them. But even so, the effect has been that roughly 12% of trade, sea trade, goes through the Red Sea, now down by half, and insurance got up by half. My question is, will they continue to attack shipping linked to Israel, US, and UK after the Gaza war ends? I think it's quite likely they'll maybe find some other reason to do so. This is a map from ACLED, which just showing where the most of the strikes are. You can see actually most of them are actually just off the Yemen coast in the Red Sea from the Bab el-Mandeb. There are some that are further out, but the concentration is there. Now, Abdul Malik on 3rd of November said vowed to escalate attacks on international ships, claiming that his forces had fired, I said, without missile. They've also trained, I mean, it was that's too strong a word, trained, they claim, 500,000 fighters. This is all meant to be people who go and liberate Palestine. But in fact, they're more likely to be used against their domestic enemies. They see themselves as one Arab state existing as well. They're in the vanguard, and they're on a roll. And for the Houthis, this is all going very well. You know, they're being recognised. They're doing things. They are. Let's move on. I could just talk briefly. I want to talk about moving to the future of Yemen. Just remind you rather of the Saudi intervention in 2015 came after accession of King Salman, a very early stage in the rise of Mohammed bin Salman. The Saudis and UAE had slightly different approaches. The Saudis trained Yemenis to fight, but most of their effort was in air force and a naval blockade. The UAE, who had much more experience of this type of fighting, trained Yemeni militias, which they then supported, equipped, mentored, and still maintain the contacts till today with a number of, and still pay for the Southern Transition Council, which is the Southern Movement, which was formed in 2017. But after 7 years of war in 2022, they were ready for a pause. Saudi Arabia wanted to focus on its own economic development. The UAE really got very disillusioned in 2018 when a campaign they had been organizing for some time to try and capture Haditha, the main port for the Houthis, was in effect stopped by the international community and the humanitarian community on the grounds that the damage it would have done to Haditha, the main port of, say, humanitarian relief, was too much. And the UAE, soon after that, started withdrawing their troops. They still maintain that links to the southern group and on Socotra. But that provided an opportunity for the UN envoy to negotiate a truce, which began in April 2022. although it wasn't renewed, it hasn't been after October. It's still they still respect it largely today. There's not much fighting. There are clashes on the front lines, but not much fighting. And of course, then Saudi Arabia reached out to Iran. At that time, at the same time, the Saudi Arabia and the UAE formed. They wanted to remove President Hadi, who was ineffective, and try and set up they could set up the Presidential Leadership Council, which consists of the main decision makers, main people with power and military power and political power in the non-Houthi area of the RGC. It's led by Rashid al-Alimi, with 7 vice presidents. But the trouble is, it might look a good strategy, and it should be uniting all the Houthi forces together. But in fact, the problem is that the key elements in that actually have different long-term objectives. The southern part, the Southern Transition Council, which is a big part of it, wants a southern state. The main bulk of the support for Rashid al-Alimi are people who want Yemen unity. But I think it's best to just show that on this map here. This is really that's the current divisions. The Houthis are that in green. The PLC area is largely the brown bit there, which I say is largely people who were part of the previous regime, GPC and its political parties, want to think to Islam, a particular enemy of the Houthis. But just as strong, possibly stronger, is this Southern Transition Council, so the yellow bit, and really more of the brown bit there, I think, than is shown in that map, which wants to re-establish a southern state. And the Transition Council has almost presented itself as a state in waiting. Edos al-Zubaydi's leader presents himself as a president. They have a sort of things resembling a parliament. And they're well organized, and they see themselves as a collective group that reaches out to all Southerners who believe in Southern unity. And it has effective armed forces. The UAE trained militias under its control are effective, and they're able to take control of Aden, for example, from President Hadi in 2015. So that this is a pretty formidable force. And then on the grey bit there is the National Resistance Forces, led by Tariq Saleh, the nephew of the former president, who these were the part of the key troops that are going to take Hodeidah, the Yemeni mission. And it consists of Republican Guards, some Southerners, and others. Those 3 are the main dominant parts of the PLC. In order to help, Saudi Arabia has been trying to help Rashid al-Alimi to, I think, extend and establish his authority. And one way of doing that is to create something called the National Resistance Forces, which have been created and trained locally, and which are then deployed to key areas to reinforce the position of the president of the council. Go back to here. This is President Alimi, and that's President, and that's I when President called himself President. Edos al-Zubaydi, the Southern leader, and here they are, 2 of them going to Washington, and this is 2003, but it's the same thing this year, where they both speak to the Americans with the current Yemeni Prime Minister nearest the camera. Now, the negotiation, the direct negotiation with the Saudis and the Houthis, with the UN in the background, really started in 2023. But it led to concessions, removing some of the flow of imports to data, and the reopening of Sana'a airport, all of which would benefit to the Houthis. And Riyadh is moving itself, Saudi Arabia is moving itself to be a mediator in this conflict, not a participant anymore, but a mediator, trying to bring the Yemeni forces together. An outline deal was reached in 2003, and it appears to offer to pay all Houthi salaries for a year, including their security forces, for a year. And it implied in its substantial contributions to reconstruction. A number of confidence building measures have been taking place, president exchanges, opening of roads, supposed to allow. I should have mentioned earlier that when the Houthis, when they were not allowed to gain access to the oil revenues in the south, used drones attacks against the facilities for oil exporting prevented the IRG, the internationally recognised government, from exporting oil and gas. But the part of the deal was that was to be that was to stop, but it hasn't yet. And it's going to be followed by a roadmap of negotiations brokered by the UN Special Envoy between the PLC and the Houthis over the future government structure. These negotiations with Houthis are extremely difficult, as anybody who's negotiating with Houthis will tell you. You can hear Ed Fitton-Brown, recent ambassador online, talking about his experiences of negotiating with Mashhad, the current head of the Houthi Supreme Council, how he still bears the scars. And I think many others have found the same problem. Houthis seem to regard as concessions other people's make and implement. But that deal was close to being finalised on the 7th of October. The next step was going to be to, but so what next? That's my last slide. Where we are now, the Houthis seem likely to respond to Israeli attack. I'm assuming there'll be an Israeli attack in Iran, and the Houthis I'm sure, will respond in some way. They'll want to be involved in, at least in protecting Iran. And it's unclear what these negotiations between the Saudis and the Houthis and between the Yemeni parties. It can't happen until after this is being solved. So it's not clear what's going to happen. There are concerns in PLC over Saudi objectives. That goes back to what I mentioned earlier, the decision over the central bank not to really remove the Houthis from the SWIFT system. Was a major concession which they didn't want to make, but it actually seems to be at least partly determined by the Saudis, and no doubt with strong international backing, because it would have been a major problem for humanitarian relief. The fighting could resume. There's concern, the fighting could resume between the Houthis and the divided PLC. But the question then is, what made the difference? That in 2021 and 2022, the Houthis made a major effort to take Ma'arib, which is the main oil-bearing facility. They were unable to do so and lost a lot of major casualties in that. And it's largely because, not entirely, the fact that the coalition air force, Saudi and UAE, were able to bomb in the territory, prevented from taking Ma'arib. But they want the Ma'arib because that is the main centre for oil and gas and energy. The PLC hoped that they've been lobbying as individually as the STC. They were here a year ago, trying to seek Western support for them against the Houthis in order to end the problems in the Red Sea. That hasn't gone anywhere. It's not very unlikely to get anywhere. But there are frequent local clashes on the front lines. And the Houthis, as I said, mostly have trained so many more fighters. And the Houthis they've gained, also I think their confidence. They seem to be moving towards greater confrontation, greater repression. And the sort of actions I mentioned earlier, the rest of the international and local people working for international organizations. None of this will actually resolve the dire political situation, humanitarian need. So the roadmap is the best option. But I mean, I think the big question going forward is, will the Houthis use politics to exploit the PLC divisions? Because you might think that the way the PLC is divided, there's a clever negotiator might be able to exploit those. Or will the PLC put itself together to confront the Houthis? I'm going to stop there.
Thank you very much indeed, Noel. Noel's kindly agreed to take questions. So this is your opportunity. What role is Oman playing in the mediation?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. The Houthis can operate. They have a setup in Oman, which really is there for contact with foreign governments. I'm sure the British government talks to them. I don't know, but I'm sure they would do. So there is that contact there. And the Omanis have long been not just a place of mediation, but active part of mediation. The truth, the negotiations between the Saudis and the Houthis was partly brokered by Omani mediators. So it's they play a significant role. I say mainly in mediation at the moment. But of course, it's critical. I mean, it is a neighbour of Oman. Al-Mahra, the context of Al-Mahra and the Dhofar are a legion. When I was in PDRY as a diplomat, our main problem was the PDRY support to Omani, to rebels in Oman. So there's a major interest.
The question is, do you foresee any easing in the banking problem as it stands at the moment, particularly in relation to aid organisations which are having difficulty getting their funds through?
Yes, I mean, the two sides are loggerheads, so it'll be very difficult. But I said, essentially, the Saudi Arabia's intervention last time, it recognises the humanitarian argument, and it also suits its role as a mediator. And so yeah, I mean, potentially yes. I mean, but those negotiations were quite close. I mean, it was Mahdi al-Mashhad meeting Mohammed al-Jaber is the key Saudi. He's called the ambassador, Yemeni ambassador to so Saudi ambassador to Yemen, but in fact is much more than that. But he was part of that. And when they went to Riyadh, they met Khalid bin Salman, who was the defense minister of Mohammed bin Salman's brother. So there is there is that recognition. I think the Saudis will help with, and the UAE will help with that. But one of the key figures that influenced Hussein al-Houthi was when he spent a year in Sudan, and he met a man called was the head of the Muslim Brotherhood there, who was a friend of Hugh. Hugh introduced me to him one day. It was extraordinary. Because he actually explained how he was a Muslim brother, but he recognized the obvious. You can't do anything unless you have power. So the entire conversation was him explaining how you take power in Sudan and then move on. And the script followed a few years later, but the script he followed. But Hugh was a friend of him.
So the question is, how effective have Israeli, US and UK counterattacks been?
Well, they clearly haven't stopped the Houthis, but the Houthis only need to launch 1 or 2 rockets every so often. They don't actually do it every day. They're finding quite long pauses. It's the threat is enough, so the big shipping lines won't take the risk. So in that sense, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if I may say so, it's rather similar to the situation that prevailed at one stage in Afghanistan, where the Taliban didn't actually need to execute very many people. They just had to do one every now and again, and that would keep villagers in order. Gentleman over here.
I mean, the UAE is, I think its primary interest is coastal and navigation. It's I think it's linked to the predominance of the UAE ports in the trade there. And you see, over many years, they've been trying to control ports like Aden and Djibouti, but because we're much closer to international shipping lines than Dubai is. So that's I think one interest is that. But the interest in Yemen, I think, are primarily in the coastal regions, maybe Aden again, but to protect shipping or to protect the trade. This seems to be the motivation, and they're doing it now, so it's less directly through the money they provide to the STC seems to come mostly from the UAE. But many leaders live in the UAE. I think that's it. And also the militias. You know, these militias are in control of the coastal areas. Even Hadramaut, which I had meant to say, but Hadramaut there's a particular interest in Hadramaut because it's an area where the Saudis and UAE objectives could come out of strain. Because in the north of Hadramaut, there's a long border with Saudi Arabia, and of course, and those national shield forces, which I mentioned, they've been deployed to key border crossing there. You do get the impression that the Saudis, looking as longer term, are interested in should we say, having a friendly authority on the other side of that border. Certainly not the Houthis, but friendly authorities. Well, the UAE are mostly focused on the STC, which in Hadramaut, for instance, sees them mostly in the strongest on the coast rather than inland.
Noel, thank you very much indeed for that. It was an extremely illuminating talk, and I'm glad that we were able to get you here for such an apposite occasion. For those who aren't aware, I mean, Noel's contributions are paid a great deal of attention to. The last time Noel spoke to the Society, the entire embassy in Sana'a was online to listen to him. So I think that's a testimony in itself. But for now, I'd simply like to thank Noel and invite you to do the same.